million in reparations to the bypassed applicants. They also agreed to an affirmative action settlement, which as a result meant that the next 50 units went to black families. As a result of this, I spent my teenage years growing up in a much more diverse and racially mixed neighborhood. I went to school, played ball with, listened to music with a group of people that was from quote-unquote the hood. I'm forever grateful for that opportunity, which probably has had an influence in shaping some of the music you're going to hear in about an hour from my band Butterbrain. But you, I said you'll hear in about an hour from my band Butterbrain. So not only did I clearly witness what we call an example of systemic racism up close, I also saw that fighting against it is not necessarily a fruitless battle. Although it's quite an uphill one, I saw that entities like the NAACP and ACLU were and still are fighting the good fight against these entities, real estate corporations, political systems, educational systems, policing systems, and penitentiary systems, to encourage and stand up for the change affected by those of the dark cloud of systemic racism. All right, now systemic racism is very different than overt, in-your-face, obvious racism, which still clearly exists, perhaps more openly in today's political climate as much as ever before. It festers in many forms. It's not an action or a situation that you can tangibly see or feel or place direct consequence on. It's an epidemic within the culture in which our country was founded. If we look back on the history of our country, perhaps it's more realistic to wonder not, how can systemic racism exist, but how can it not exist? Our country, with its many great accomplishments, principles, and government checks and balances, was founded almost entirely by white males who were slave owners. At a time when blacks, minorities, and women were not only considered less than, but didn't have a right to vote or participate in building the foundation that our country was constructed on. In fact, it took almost 100 years of our country's existence before slavery was abolished and black men granted the right to vote. Then almost another 100 years until the Civil Rights Movement in 1964, when the 24th Amendment was passed and the 1965 Voting Rights Act was passed. Many of these did away with systematic hurdles like grandfather clauses, literary tests, poll taxes, and gerrymandering that absolutely kept minorities from having an equal say or voice in our political system. In many ways, we should be proud of how far we've come as a nation. But in many ways, we have to take a look statistically at how much we're stuck in the mud. As much as I like to hear myself talk, I'm just going to touch on a few points of the prominent areas of systemic racism in our society. First, education. Systemic racism permeates the education system in the U.S. Common examples include inequitable funding, a lack of diverse curricula, and an underrepresentation of teachers from different cultures. From an early age, many of us are told that the path to success starts with doing well in school. If you work hard enough and do your best, you will be rewarded. However, this promise is more of a fantasy than a reality for many, especially those from underrepresented communities. Disparities in school funding throughout the U.S. is an issue for many schools that primarily serve students from underrepresented communities. Public school funding often comes from property taxes, which many schools in wealthier neighborhoods are usually funded better than schools in poorer neighborhoods. Statistically speaking, black and Latino households hold less than 3% of the wealth in the U.S., which usually results in less funding for schools in black and Latino neighborhoods. Another area where systemic racism is clear and present is policing. In my lifetime, from Rodney King to Abner Louima to Sean Bell to Eric Garner to George Floyd, the list goes on and on. I've witnessed it my whole life, sometimes with my own two eyes. Too many black men have become victims of police brutality, many right here in our beloved city. That is a clear example of systemic racism in the police force, right here in New York and around the country. Another area where systemic racism is indisputable is in the criminal justice system. In no area of American society are the legacies of slavery and racism more evident than in the criminal justice system. Despite making up only 12% of the U.S. population, black people make up 50% of the country's prison population. As of 2015, about 55% of people imprisoned in federal or state prisons were black or Latino. Not even going into the prison industrial complex, where outside entities thrive off the profits that the prison industrial complex creates, perpetuating these systematically racist tendencies. The last area I'm going to mention today is the presence in our healthcare system. As of 2019, 58% of Americans were covered by employer-sponsored health insurance, with 66% of white workers covered by this insurance, compared with 47% of blacks, 43% of Latino, and 37% of American Indian and Alaska Native workers. Those without employer-sponsored health insurance are often uninsured, with black and Latino people approximately 1.5 to 2.5 times more likely, respectively, to be uninsured than white people. All right, so where does this information and statistical analysis leave us? Sick of hearing numbers, right? What's the answer to solve this problem? Well, I believe it's evident that the information clearly shows an infestation of systematic racism in many facets of American society. Like I stated earlier, it's more not how than how not. Uprooting infestation takes time. Systemic racism is interwoven in so many facets of American society that we can't expect that change to happen overnight. Through small and big battles, through changing laws and constitutional amendments, the Freedom March, the Black Lives Matter, the power of the people has been perhaps the strongest source of progress. The American Civil Liberties Union and the NAACP are constantly fighting for people, and voting has become just as important, if not more than ever, regardless of which side of the political spectrum you're on. Most importantly, I want to recognize that nonprofit organizations like this one here, for Rock Against Racism, how powerful a message is behind an event like this. An event like this correlates personally to my world. As a musician, this is the place where systemic racism is most up front and center. In my world, it's the music business. I watched as a teenager while underground bands of color like the Bad Brains, like Fishbone, I said like Fishbone, influenced the whole generation of artists, including me and my band Butterbrain. While they paved the path artistically and toured and worked twice as hard as most bands in that genre, other artists, mainly white artists, that copied or imitated their sound, Red Hot Chili Peppers, no doubt, just to name a few, went on to mainstream success and major label backing, monetary and radio support. As an artist that was previously signed to a major label, I can tell you personally, the music business is more about who you know, how to play the game, and how to procure financial backing. These black artists in punk, hardcore, metal never got the same monetary push as other white artists. It's a fact. And this, my friends, is my last example of systemic racism in the music industry. That's what makes the underground events like this, supported by non-profit organizations such as this, so friggin' important. Thanks again to Diane Molina, Rock Against Racism. Now, who the hell's ready to hear some live music by the Skadanks coming up soon? I said